I
Go
see me in
ahead.
all my blackness and all my brown skin is
Me and all my milky paleness.
caucasity. You and all your caucasity.
Cassidy. I reached out to you because I posted a thing that you shared on Facebook first, and I was like, yes, this is true. This needs to be acknowledged. Wait, what exactly did it say? White privilege is not saying that
It's actually right up. There you go.
it's not saying that you haven't had a hard life. It's saying that your skin color isn't part of the reason that you've had a hard life or something like that. And then I've got people on there who are like all up in arms and like, whoa, don't be racist against white people. You can tell I'm going to be very mature here. But no, I don't want to talk. Like, they put some more comments. I'm like, I don't care what you have to say. I want to listen to someone who's actually affected by it. You know?
All right. Well, I don't know where to start. I have a very I have an informed opinion as it relates to white privilege. As I said in our last conversation, I have taken a lot of time to read book race. It's kind of important to Black people because we have to understand this landscape that we live in. So we study this stuff. A lot of people that I know, they read books and they read articles, and we are very intentional because I think deep down we want to be able, and I was just talking to my wife about this, I think deep down we want to be able to have these kind of conversations and be effective in communicating with white people, because I always say we were very rarely taught anything about our history in school. I mean, you had, it's funny, oddly, it's MLK and all of that jazz. You know, you have February, which is Black History Month. You get that month, and then that's pretty much it. So I've always had this position of I can't blame white people for holding the type of positions and opinions that they have. They barely taught us about their history. So I know they didn't care about teaching you guys about our history. So it's always humorous to hear white people have such strong opinions when you guys are not the subject matter experts. We are. We experience it. We live it directly, indirectly. Our families are impacted. We feel it. We can sense it. It's something that is innate in us. And some of us do a better job of articulating those thoughts than others, but all of us kind of know what's going on here in this country. But yet you would have my white brothers and sisters who would say, well, no, it's not that. Maybe you're being this, and no, I don't see it that way, and so on and so forth. So, Katie, it is a privilege in this country to be white. Um, and I always say that white privilege doesn't live in a vacuum. If it was all white people here, then sure, no, it's not a privilege to be white. But we are here. Black people are here, and white privilege is tied directly to Black disadvantage. That's why it is a benefit for you to be white, because we feel the disadvantage of being Black. And an important note is systematically. It's like, sure, you have some Black people are winning, but across the board, typically we deal with more hardship, we deal with more hurdles, we deal with more police contact and so on and so forth than at large white people and white citizens do. So it is a privilege.
It's just so weird. It's so uncomfortable. It immediately just brings like this, I don't know what to do about it, but I want to know what to do, and I want to know what to say when people are like, don't be racist against white people and it's not our fault, and we've moved past all of that now, and everything's hunky-dory,
Yeah.
you know?
This is how I would speak to that is, again, it's a miseducation and it's a lack of education, because there's racism, there's prejudice, and then there's bigotry. And every few years or so, I have to brush up on these terms. And sadly, I didn't brush up on them today. But racism speaks to Of course, a feeling of superiority, but it's also tied to power because um, if I'm racist against you in a country where we typically don't hold the power, then don't have the ability to impact your life. We don't have the ability to kind of dictate how you do things. So my racism, my feeling like I'm superior to white people really has no impact on society at large. Sure, I might be able to oppress the waiter or waitress who brings me my food and treat her poorly, but I can't impact her pay or whether or not she gets a loan from the bank. Just things like that. So, and then there's prejudice, which is to look at you and to say and have feelings about you before I even know you, which is something that all can be. We can all be prejudiced. But there's no power in prejudice. It's just like I look at you, I judge you, I think, you're not, and I don't know you. And then bigotry, that's one that I kind of am dull on, but I think it's like this kind of like nastiness towards people, like being a bigot. And I don't know what the definition is. Maybe we can insert it or
Yeah.
drop a line somewhere. So when you look at a situation where people want to have a conversation about things, we have to kind of be on a level playing field where we're all talking about the same thing. What people are talking about when they say we move forward and it's over, and that's back in the day, is they're talking about that nasty ugliness, the N word, and throwing stuff and spitting on people. We don't see a whole lot of that these days, but there's still racism, this power structure that lingers, and it may not be explicitly oppressive in the ways that it was back in the day, but it's like, man, you can't deny the impact. Let's just bring it to Christianity. You can't deny the impact that Jesus had on this world, even to this day. Sure, he's not around now in the flesh walking the earth, but there's a legacy, there's an impact, there's things that we believe because he was here, there's things that we act a certain way because he was here. So just because y'all are not, y'all collectively are not like trying to stop us from coming into schools and hurling slurs at us and things like that, that still doesn't mean that the legacy of pushing Black people to the south side of a city, white flight, which left the cities with a lower tax base than they had before. So the inner city structure starts to crumble because Black people don't make as much money as white people. Black people are not employed at the same rate as Black people. That stuff leaves a legacy. So it's like when people say let's move on, they're oversimplifying this thing that is racism in this country. Just because you don't call me the N-word anymore doesn't mean you don't have feelings about me, about my children, about me walking through your neighborhood, about the fact that you would accuse me of stealing before you accuse someone else. You would follow me around the store because I'm Black. And what's interesting about that, a quick deviation, those actions are inherently rooted in the power structure that tells you that Black people typically have less. Because why does anybody steal? It's because they're not doing as well as other people. So it's like there's this assumption in the minds of people that, okay, if a white person is walking through the store and they don't look grungy or dirty or like a mall rat or whatever, I don't know what the fancy words are or the derogatory words are for white people who steal stuff. But if there's a person who's walking through a store or an establishment, you would assume that they may not steal. It's the same reason why police assume that white college students aren't using drugs and they don't pat them down and they're not checking them for paraphernalia and so on and so forth. So it's really interesting, the things that are kind of built into our minds because of society and how society kind of has conditioned us.
How do I phrase this? It's like, how do we address it? Like, there was a really stupid part of my brain, lack of education, stuff that's just put in there before you're even old enough to really comprehend what it is. That was like, whenever the trope of the disgruntled young Black person who's wearing the Malcolm X shirts and stuff and is like, our people are oppressed, and there's this smug little part of me that was like, you weren't born in Africa, what the heck, get over it. And I feel so stupid. I mean, I didn't know better. I'm much older now. I have much
Mm-hmm.
more experiences in life now, and I know that that trauma is inherited like through our genes. Like, it's not something that people should get over, but like, how do we address it? How do I as a white person create some kind of make a change? How does the bad genes in me speak to the bad genes in you, you know?
Hmm.
Isn't that an interesting
You
question?
said a lot, and I don't know if I have a solution to all of that. One thing that some of the most some of the coolest white people I know, they have had an experience, a proximity to Black people. And what that does is that gets you closer to what life is like for us. So, you know, you and me being able to like talk and chat, you get a greater understanding. I can expand your horizon because I can speak to my experiences or my understanding of other people's experiences. So it's really a thing where I think people just need to kind of talk more. And it's tough for white people to speak to other white people about it because it's almost like you just learned algebra and you're trying to teach somebody else algebra. It's like you're kind of not versed in it yet. You know what I mean? You're not the best teacher. You have to kind of, but I can appreciate some white people's vigor, but I think sometimes you guys do more harm than good because it's like once you get it, you got it. And it's like, no, no, no. Black people are disadvantaged. I lived a better life because I was white compared to my Black counterpart. It's like it makes sense to you, but the ability to teach and explain that to your white brothers and sisters, it's a bit hard.
So Ivan, it's like people have this thing that like if I say I have privilege because I'm white, it's not me saying I think I'm better than you. Like, obviously I don't. You know?
I'll give an example of something that came to me like in the last 12 months or so, which is this idea that, you know, privilege and disadvantage are tied to each other. So you look at someone, because this is another thing that comes up. People kind of feel like, well, you're lucky to be born in America. You're lucky to be here. Um, but this is how privilege works. If you compare the US to a third world country, then yes, I, as a Black man in America, am privileged. I'm privileged to be here. So that kind of makes the point a little easier to understand that privilege is a comparative thing. I have certain benefits from being here that you don't have. You're trying to migrate here. You're trying, you know, land of the free, home of the brave. It's like, even though life is hard for me, and I'm speaking like collectively because I live a very interesting life. Um, I also have a certain outlook because of my faith. I also have a certain outlook because of how I grew up. But comparatively, then yes, you could say Black Americans are privileged, depending on who you compare it to. I don't. There are other countries that have blossoming economies and healthcare and things like that. We may not be as privileged as those people. There are African countries that are flourishing and Black people are moving forward, and they've always been kind of progressive. Like a neighbor of mine is from Africa. He talks about how the Cosby Show wasn't that impactful for him because he knew Black doctors. His family members were doctors, and it wasn't a shock to see that. So it was just like, oh, well, it's just a show I watch for entertainment. So yeah, I'll stop there.
What would you say to the people who, like, for example, I have a friend, she's half Black, half white, and she's grown up in a white world, and so she doesn't feel like it applies to her, you know, like the people who think well, it is the Black people who are the most violent and troublesome, you know, like that they're, yeah, I just don't know how to talk. I don't know how to,
Yeah.
I don't know how to, what to say to that.
It's an interesting thing. And I may not necessarily I feel like a very middle of the road kind of person. So when you deal with this concept of violence, right? I watched. Let's look at alcoholism, so or drug abuse or whatever. I watch Alaskan shows, and I remember an episode where someone spoke to like how in Alaska, because they're so what I mean when I say Alaska, I don't want to paint a broad brush. Certain like villages and places like that are kind of like isolated. They have their limited resources. They have their way of life. The industry is not booming. They have to go out and they have to hunt and so on and so forth. You have those type of vacuums where there are people in that village who will fall into crime. There are people in that village who will fall into alcoholism. Life is tough for them. So it's like the circumstances impacts people differently. So, okay, you look at someone, another example is people who go to prison. They talk about how people who are nonviolent offenders, when you go into prison, you kind of almost have to become a different thing. So it's like, yeah, you can say that in the Black communities, there's violence and murder and so on and so forth. It's like, but when you starve any group of people of resources, then they evolve into a thing. I mean, look at the pandemic. You know what I mean? There's no toilet paper anywhere. People are pushing each other, shoving and fighting. When resources get scarce, stuff gets real. So you have Black communities that are resource starved. And so, I mean, of course, what are some of those people going to do? Not excusing it, but to understand human behaviors, to understand that some people will take the high road and some people will, revert to things that are less than desirable, and even like undesirable. So it's like, when you understand the psychology of things, when you do the work and you educate yourself, you get it. It's not as, on the surface, like, well, crime is high, Black on Black crime. You know what I mean? It's like, I have a difference of opinion because I feel like people nitpick about the phrase Black on Black crime, but it's just like, okay, it is a thing. It is a problem in our community. Just because white people have deemed it Black on Black crime to kind of like trigger and dog whistle to like dysfunctional Black communities, we do have problems within our community. But my previous statement kind of explains that. So I don't have a knee jerk reaction to this idea that Black on Black crime is like not a thing. We don't like the way that it's described, but that phrase does describe a phenomena within some Black communities. So that's another thing. You may not even be familiar with that particular kind of back and forth in the Black community as it relates to how white people kind of talk about Chicago and DC and Baltimore and basically any place where Black people kind of live. And here's the thing, it's like we live there for a reason, because you didn't want us moving to certain areas. You pushed us into the projects after the good white folks that you designed the housing projects for kind of got their leg up and got their loan, bought homes and started to build generational wealth. So now we're stuck with the dilapidated communities that were built for people out of the Great Depression. Don't quote me on that. That's me kind of inferring and deducing based on stuff that I've learned over the years.
It's really interesting because the same sort of thing happened where I grew up. Utah is mostly like 50% white, 50% Hispanic, and like 10% everything. Okay, I'm really bad at math, but 10% everything else.
It's okay.
That's 110%. So I grew up in a neighborhood that was the former nice houses that the white people moved further up the mountain to expand. And these houses are like, I grew up in an inner city, and there were gangs and graffiti, and it's so weird. You seeing these houses that you could tell they used to be beautiful, and they just have like, they're full of junk and on the porches, and it's people have like their curtains are nailed up blankets over the thing, and I grew up hearing so much racism against Hispanic people that there would be these oompa music playing and till late at night, and people peeing in their yards, and bad curtain and paper and blanket curtains, but enough money to buy fireworks to set off for a long, long time. And
Mm-hmm.
it was just so weird growing up around that. And the people
Yeah.
that I heard the most racism like spoken was upper class Mexicans talking about how much they hated lower class Mexicans for making them look bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing that happens when you're not the majority. You're kind of like a representative of your community in all ways. You have to kind of walk a certain way and talk a certain way and not make us look bad. And the interesting thing about that is I shouldn't say it's all linked to, but it's about media portrayal first and foremost, because the media and news reports on certain things intentionally because it feeds a certain narrative. Malicious sometimes maybe became the trend at some point, and maybe it gets to a point where it's not so malicious anymore, but it's like it started out malicious. You know what I mean? If you look back, and I love how knowledgeable the person you talked to, the black woman
Oh, Miss
who was kind of, she's like
Andrea.
an educator, because you look at certain flyers and newspaper ads and you could kind of see like the bad black guy gonna steal the white woman. It's like that plants a seed, you know what I mean? So then you have this thing where you don't want to be seen as aggressive, you don't want to be seen as like strong, because during slavery they would make you fight other black people, or they would kill you if you were like the dominant person. They wanted you to be strong to work, but it's like there was an interesting dynamic as it relates to how slaves owners looked at slaves. Like, of course you want to breed and to be strong and stuff like that, but then once we got free, it's like it's a problem now. Like, you can't be strong-minded and strong-willed because they're afraid of you. So it's like all of these things kind of play into effect, and it's interesting to see some of my Mexican, Hispanic, Latinx brothers and sisters who have this kind of this idea, this outlook on us and some of their brothers and sisters, because they've worked hard and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and things like that. And it's like I get that, you know, but I give this example all the time. You can raise people, you and your husband, many families across the world can have the same values, raising the same children, and those same children can turn out drastically different. And it's like people like to have this idea that, well, if I can do it, you can do it. And it's like, well, no, that's not true. We don't see that in life at all. If I teach you audibly about math in math class and you're a visual learner, then you're not going to get anything. But if you're approaching it one way, the bootstrap way, like help yourself, get it done, push on, press on. It's like not everyone is built like that. And again, when you understand the psychology and the sociology behind it, you get it. But people who are ignorant to that look at it as making excuses. It's like, no, we're not making excuses. We want to explain so that you understand what you're dealing with. And then at the end of the day, really, the problem is nobody really wants to solve this problem. You know what I mean? So it's like sometimes I'll have conversations with people, and then sometimes I realize, you know, that person is not vested in my community. Why am I trying to get him on my team anyway? Like the Bill O'Reillys of the world. I would kind of long for moments where I could talk to Bill O'Reilly because he's so wrong-minded. And I enjoyed those moments when Jon Stewart would engage with him, but not as thoroughly as I felt like I could engage with him. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. It's like Bill O'Reilly ain't on my team. He's not coming to my community. It's like, what do I get? What do I gain by convincing him that he's wrong-minded? It's like, you know, so sometimes it's not worth it. Those people feel the way that they feel, and sometimes they are a lost cause. I decide often whether or not I have what I like to call an audience with a person that I'm talking to. If I feel like that person is open to talking to me, if I feel like that person is receptive and reasonable, then I can have a conversation with that person about race. And I will often say, like, hey, if you'd like to talk about this via messenger, where we can kind of take some of the nuances of texting and all of that jazz and the argumentative nature of social media, then yeah, I would like to do that. Not many people take me up on that offer because at the end of the day, they're not in the conversation for that. So I just move on.
I just kind of feel at this point like I just don't need people in my life that aren't willing to see things for what they are, who aren't willing to listen to a Black person say, this is the truth of what I've lived through, what my ancestors have lived through, who don't want to be uncomfortable about it. Like when you talk, when you say, I'm gonna maybe like cry because I just don't like know what to do with these emotions. But when you talked about the fact that slaves are bred, like that's just so disgusting, and it just makes you feel so icky. And you know, people don't want to feel so icky. They just want to be comfortable away from it. But like, no, we got to talk about it and tell the stories, and just like, I just need to shut up and listen. We all just need to shut up and listen and not try to be white saviors over there fixing things.
So, Katie, here's the thing, though. And I think that it's complicated because you have not everyone is equipped to talk about race. Not every Black person is a welcoming presence as it relates to, you know, having conversations. Not everyone is able to articulate and speak to things in such a way that it makes sense and it doesn't feel like trying to invoke white guilt or, you know, whatever. It's like, so we are the product of having very bad conversations about it, very limited information, and there are entities out there that want us to pick sides. Like, oh, white privilege. No white privilege. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's ridiculous. And it's just like nobody wants to talk about it. So you have like, you know, the Fox News, the Tucker Carlsons, the whoever, you know, represent these kind of positions that can kind of put it on their bullhorn out to people who are not actively they're not actively researching, they're not actively interested in it. They just get that kind of quick blip of whatever. It's the same thing, you know, it's gay marriage, vaccines, the police, and it's just like there's these people make us pick sides, and we pick the side that is closest to what we're naturally inclined to go with anyway, but we're not interested in having a conversation about it. So I think we have to push on, but we do have to kind of figure out who's worthy of having that conversation with. And that's my temperament. Some people just kind of push and they push and they push and they push, but you know,
don't throw your pearls to the swine.
Boom.
I just want to ruffle all the people. I hope I get a bunch of people unsubscribing this video. Like, just leave. I don't care. Kel Simmons would be so happy. Do you recognize her from No Small Creator? She's like,
I do.
You got to get people unsubscribing. You got to make people mad. She's gonna be so happy for me. No, because in my discovery of having this amazing conversation with David Hoffman, this guy who's interviewed people who were there at Martin Luther, the riots after Martin Luther King was assassinated, you know, like someone who's present to history, and going down this road and having my eyes opened to the fact that evangelicalism is at its core racist. I was just like, I was desperate to find out what the hell were white Christians doing when all this was happening? Like, where were the white Christians who were standing up with Black brothers and sisters saying how they've been treated is wrong, Jim Crow is wrong? But no, the evangelicals were like, no, don't make us lose our tax exempt status just because we won't let colored people into our schools.
And that position, that position void of nuance is why white people kind of push back from that, because it's just like us. It's just like human beings. You go to your husband and you say, you know what, you never take out the trash the night before. And it's like, well, that's not true. Sometimes I do it. You know, it's like, well, 80% of the time you don't. So the conversation deserves and it requires nuance, because there were white people who are part of the abolitionist movement. I haven't researched this heavily, but there was a presence in some capacity. So we can't necessarily paint with broad, but it's like at the end of the day, it's to your point, this idea of understanding humanity. And it's like, well, yeah, if they had more resources, if their father wasn't unloving or missing in the first place, they wouldn't be out here behaving in a certain way. If they didn't have a community that was so taxed because both parents had to be working, and if in a community where there may not be two parents, in a school where nobody cares about education, when your books look like they look like I've grown up with that. I've seen resources be like just terrible. You know what I mean? It's like my teachers did the best that we could. I learned as much as I could. I was uninterested from an intellectual fervor position. So I don't, it's like even in that affects me because I didn't grow up in a system that encouraged achievement. So it was like I was bored. So I didn't achieve in high school. Who knows what Ivan would be if he went to a school that was well funded and in a that was close by and had less students in it, and whatever. So it's like even in me being the person that I am now, I'm impacted by the systemic effect of growing up in New Orleans, a black city that had limited resources. So even the best of us are the best of us. Like I'm fly, even the best of us are impacted. The smartest of us are impacted. The most intellectually capable of us are impacted. So when you have all of those things against you, man, sometimes you make bad choices. Sometimes you become a not so good person. And it just is what it is. Let's get back to the idea of privilege. I benefit from two-parent privilege. I didn't grow up in a single parent home. So I did nothing to deserve. I did nothing to say parents stay together. So that's a privilege to me. It's something that I didn't earn. And that gets back to the idea of privilege. You receive a certain benefit merely of circumstances that are beyond your control. White privilege is real. It's a benefit to be in a country where you are the standard. You belong. There are very few places where you go where you feel out of place. And if you happen to stumble into the black neighborhood, sure, you might get robbed. You might get something thrown at your car. If it's a really bad neighborhood, you might feel unsettled and scared. But how often do you have to go there? I got to go work with white people all the time, all my life. Black people have to learn how to navigate a society that doesn't necessarily approve of our hair or how we talk or how we walk or how we may want to dress. And that's me being reasonable because some things are just completely out of pocket. There's decency and so on and so forth. And I can acknowledge that. But it's a benefit there are certain places I won't go after dark because I don't know how white folks is going to act towards me. If I got lost or if I broke down in a certain neighborhood, I may not go knock on somebody's door. They might kill me. Those are things that I think about all the time. And I feel like white people don't necessarily have to think like that. I mean, sure, you may have some fear on a dark street and stuff like that, but you don't necessarily feel like a whole community may be out to get you. Or the police officer may suspect that you're about to break into a house because you happen to break down and then shoot you because you have your wallet or your phone in a position that is unbecoming, or you're reaching for something, because it's just like, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. It is a benefit to be white in this country, for sure. Oh, to this point of privilege, I thought about you and your husband. It's like, again, the idea of privilege, I feel like he's a Swede. I hear you call him that often.
Yeah.
So there's a privilege to you guys living there that he has over you. He's a native. He moves in a certain way. It's like you feel out of place. And that's the same thing with white privilege and black disadvantage. You're at a disadvantage because that is not your native environment. He has the benefit of being a native there. And I feel like it's the same thing with white people. That's another one. It's kind of disheartening. We have a standard. We know God is a holy God. He desires for us to keep pressing and to keep progressing. And we have to call out certain things in a certain way. You know what I mean? It's like, but ultimately, Jesus is the best example. You know what I mean? It's just like, man, just study Jesus. How did Jesus act? And it's like we get into these verses and we start putting ourselves into these situations and we start acting in a way that's very unbecoming of believers. And it just gets weird. Dell is in this group. My wife, who but Dell is in this group for apologetics. And they just do, I see, this is me painting with a broad brush. There are people in that group who don't want to talk about race, who just have this idea of like, no, it's a sin problem, and we can't fix it and stuff like that. And it's so interesting. It's like, man, but you want to give funding towards anti-abortion stuff. That's a problem you're okay with fixing in the name of your white Jesus, but you don't want to fix race relations in the country. That's not worthy of your crusade on the behalf of light-skinned Jesus. Go ahead.
So, Ivan, the very simple reason for that is the bad end times theology. It doesn't matter what happens. Jesus is going to come any minute, and we'll all be caught up in the air, and it won't be anyone's problem anymore. Bad theology. Yeah. Bad.
Yeah. And then to get that, you got to evangelize. So, and 9 times out of 10, those people ain't sharing Jesus with nobody. Me being guilty as well. But it's just like most people, they love their Sunday morning worship service, which we like to call church. And they do that, and then they go back to their lives. It's like, so again, it's like, are you trying to solve problems? Are you trying to address injustices? Mm-hmm. It's really, man, I don't know, racism and white supremacy just did like a number on white people. It just really did.
It's so
sad.
I'm so disappointed. It's a bit of a crisis for a little while now that I can't even trust myself to pick up my Bible, because I'm like, well, what cowboy Jesus theology has been so ingrained into my brain that it's just a part of who I am. Like, it's how much wrong stuff is in there. Yeah. Like, maybe this will sound really weird, and I may be inappropriate. I don't know. I have no idea. But I kind of wish that I grew up Black so that I could have grown up with better theology.
Yeah, I get that. That's a romanticization of Black culture. And I don't want you to go there, because we have our issues. I don't know. I don't think so. I just think we got so this is what I think. I wouldn't necessarily say we got better theology. I would say that because of struggle, empathy is higher in us than it is in most people. We can empathize better. And empathy is an important, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. So we understand struggle, we understand hardship. So even when our white brothers and sisters go through hard times, I just feel like we're more empathetic people because we've been through so much. I wouldn't necessarily say we got better theology, because we be wilding too.
I'd love to talk more about that with you some other time. That sounds fascinating.
Oh, this is an important point. It's systematic. White privilege is systematic. You're going to have people who excel in white culture. You're going to have people who struggle in white culture. But when you compare it, it's like anybody who's looked at the numbers, infant mortality rate, income inequality, the quality of living, the quality of healthcare, our interactions with the police, which is a tricky one. I try not to point to that one because people like to go to well, y'all are more violent. And it's just like, well, you're not thinking deep enough to kind of deal with that. But we talked about that earlier. But if you compare things, then something is not right with how Black people are treated in this country. And it's not like just poor Black people. It's Black people. Like Obama, Oprah, Michael Jordan, these people all have stories of dealing with inequality in this country because of this right here. No matter what level you succeed to as a Black person in this country, you're still Black.
Sometimes I just don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Hey, I dig that. I feel like, channel that idea of ignorance that you felt, that you can kind of harken back to. Be empathetic towards your brothers and sisters that you talk to versus like some people who get enlightened and it's just like, oh, why can't you get it? And it's just like, it takes time. Plant that seed. A conversation that you have with somebody, like, just same spiritual concepts. It's like we plant the seed,
Yeah.
we water it, but God brings the increase. So I kind of rest in that.
That's
You can go ahead.
and that's a really good point. It's the changes that have happened in my brain have taken a long time to come to fruition and are still formulating like crazy little, it's like the baby being is a zygote and multiplying cells to become a full baby. It's like the fact
It takes time.
it takes so much time.
Mhm.
So
And
it's
it takes experiences and conversations like this.
just thank you so much for sharing and letting me just say weird, uncomfortable things and not really well formulated, just trying to get it out there. Thanks for helping me to learn. And thank you to anybody who watches this video. I need to have grace and let God plant the seed where the seed needs to be planted and trust that it's being planted, because I know if I can get better and I can change from so many things that were wrong and very narrow-minded, other people can too.
It's your journey, Katie. Don't feel bad. As long as you're progressing, as long as you're trying to move forward. If you feel frustrated, if you kind of want to point the finger, I feel like be authentically you. If you need to apologize afterward, just do that genuinely. It's like you don't have to feign whatever. You know what I mean? It's like be you. You're upset with people, be upset. It's okay.
It's scary. It's scary. I'm a people pleaser. I want everyone to like me. I genuinely just want everybody to be happy and get along and kumbaya, but I know that's not always possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, man, there are people out there who are crazy. There are people out there who are stealing people's cars, they're abducting people, they're selling people into child slavery. It's just like, it is what it is. As much as we know it intellectually that people are messed up, we get confronted with it every now and then. So it's just like, man, you reach who you can. You plant the seed where you can. Sometimes things are despicable. They just are. It is what it is. We can't do much about it other than pray and, you know, know that we have something later.
You're a very valuable person, that your calmness just breathes peace into the conversation. And we need so much more of that. And like, as I've put so much work into my channel trailer, like I believe in compassion and I believe in authenticity and all these things, but it's like untempered authenticity can just be straight up rage. Rage can be the most authentic emotion, but I want compassion to be the last one. I want it to be the one, the feeling that when people finish one of my vlogs or listen to one of these epic conversations, that the thing that they walk away from, the feeling that they hold on to it walking away, is compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I dig it. I agree.
Bye. Thank you so much. Hopefully we will talk again soon. I really appreciate you taking this time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you reaching out for sure. Say hi to the family.
Will do. You too. Say hi
Thank
to
you.
your cute little family and your wife who's about to pop any second now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll pass on the message.
Okay, bye.
Peace.
Peace.
Holla.